Good morning and welcome to the Morning Spotlight podcast. I'm your host, Mike Ham, coming to you as always from the Spotlight Studios in Morristown, New Jersey. We're talking good old-fashioned hospitality today. We got a great panel. We got three guys who are very tied into different assets of the hospitality industry. So we're going to meet them. We're going to get started. Our first panelist is a partner at Murphy, Schiller, and Wilkes in Newark, New Jersey, Matt Schiller. Matt, welcome.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for coming on.
Great, thanks.
Our next panelist is the managing partner at TRJ Consulting Services, Trevor Andersen. Trevor, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Mike. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And last but not least, he is the owner and head chef at Harvest Bistro in Madison, New Jersey, Tushar Patel. Tushar, welcome.
Hey, how's it going, guys? Thanks for the invite.
Absolutely. All right, so let's just jump right into it. So, Trevor, we're going to start with you. So, give us an idea of some current major trends facing the restaurant industry. We're going to start with restaurants. We'll do more hospitality stuff as we get more into this stuff. So, why don't you take it away?
Of course. I mean, listen, thanks again for having me here, and I appreciate being part of the panel. I think in terms of some of the bigger trends that we've been seeing on some of the restaurants that I've been working with, and really the strategy and scope is around pricing. How do you strive in this low volume atmosphere? I'm sure Tushar can point us in the right direction there. I mean, you used to have, 100% capacity. Now you're rocking in, the mid-teens, if I'm guessing. Your cost doesn't really change too much. So how do we succeed in this environment? And one of the things that I've been doing is just trying different things. And I know Tushar is way ahead of me because he and I talk quite a bit, but, getting outside a little bit more often, going to parks, places where you can have public settings, changing your outdoor model. One of the things we talk about is changing pricing, reverse chargeback credit cards, all different tips to kind of help drive some solid performance to the bottom line. And that's really what we're trying to do at TRJ and help small businesses kind of fight through this time. I think for me personally, I'm a silent owner in a small business, specifically in the restaurant world, and I can tell you firsthand that it's not easy. And I think the purpose of kind of our conversation here is to kind of help provide our listeners with some more tips and tricks, and also things that may have not gone so well. I think Tushar can tell you, hands down operationally the things that he's done that have gone good and gone bad, and I think that's really the value we're talking about here.
Yeah, so here, just a couple ideas. We get thrown a bomb at us that all restaurants are going to have to close. You can't open up your doors. But, and then I don't know, whether it was hours or, a half a day or something that, you could still do takeout. Yeah, that's great. But what am I going to do? Because the basis of my business is dining in-house and off-premise catering, right? So, instead of sitting there worrying about everything, I had to immediately go into sit down and have my staff meeting real quick. Listen, we're not closing. We're not doing anything. We're going to stay open fully. No one's going to lose their jobs and move forward. Secondly, then we had to come up with a new menu to get out to the people. So listen, hey, the creative process, what can we do? Like we were talking about before, price-wise, where do we have to be in that area to provide the best product at a good price point and to do the volume, So there's so many different factors you have to think about. And
right.
We came out with these little dinners to go based on 2 adults, 2 children. And we started at $40 for a family of 4, And, it kicked off really well. And not to knock any of the other restaurants or anything, but they saw us doing that. And I don't want to say that we were the first ones to do that because a lot of restaurants do family style meals. But this was something that we thought of and, our model worked. It worked really well. And we did it for, maybe a couple months, and then it just started going, sales started going down. So it's just constantly reinventing yourself. I've never had to pivot so much in such a short amount of time.
Right.
Just to keep business going.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Trevor and I had so many conversations about this. Well, what are you going to do this week? What are you going to do this week? I'm like,
right.
No.
And then at one point, right before the 4th of July, you guys were going to have indoor dining. And then 2 days prior to that, they shut it down. I remember that. That was crazy.
Yeah, menus
out of nowhere.
Did 30 seconds before the bell rang inside your restaurant that did, with kind of renovating and whatnot. And then Murphy goes, no.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm all the time wasted doing that.
Yeah, getting ready. It's, you know, big holiday weekend, all that kind of stuff. So, all right. So, Matt, we're gonna get you in. I promise. So here we go. So you obviously have a little bit different perspective as, you know, being a real estate attorney, looking at it like a little bit different scope. So why don't you give us some legal challenges facing the hospitality industry as a whole right now?
Sure. And look, at the end of the day, this COVID-19 crisis has really touched all aspects of the real estate industry. And obviously hospitality has been, you know, one of the more significantly or most impacted industries as a whole. But, you know, as a real estate attorney, it's impacted, you know, almost all and touched almost all aspects of real estate, whether it just simply be leasing issues. You know, you obviously have landlords and tenants that are having to deal with rent issues as both businesses have struggled and otherwise tried to figure out what to do. Moreover, you have other challenges, and I'd be curious what, you know, Trevor and everybody has to say about dealing with even like little zoning issues and working through issues such as outdoor dining and all of a sudden having, you know, tables and chairs and people eating outside and what's permitted under municipal law and how the various municipalities been in terms of cooperating and allowing all of this to go on. So it's such leasing, landlord, tenant, zoning. Quite frankly, I had a number of real estate transactions that were going that were, you know, went under contract in January and February. And all of a sudden this crisis hits, and all of a sudden all of your underwriting that you did as both a purchaser or financing from a lending perspective went completely out of whack. You know, for, I would say, the first 3 months of all of this, you were dealing with PPP loans and trying to keep your clients afloat over the past couple of months. And, you know, both from a landlord level, making sure your tenants were actually applying for PPP loans, and from a tenant, making sure that they knew exactly what they were supposed to be doing and holding their hands, trying to navigate, you know, government programs and government incentives that were really quickly put together, quite frankly, and then thrown to the banks to try and administer, you know, at volumes that banks just simply weren't equipped to handle. And now we're dealing with what happens next as a lot of these governmental incentives and other things like that start going away. What businesses are going to be able to survive and what aren't. And so you're dealing both, again, with the restaurants and hotels and other industries that, you know, now are trying to whittle it out. Lenders, same thing. How do you underwrite any acquisition or anything going on? And again, I was telling you before the podcast, my past 6 weeks dealt with effectively a massive UCC foreclosure of 8 different hotels throughout the country, in which they basically turned over their equity interest in the hotels and the keys to my client as a lender, because the hotels were just not going to be able to cover their debt coverage. And so, you know, in terms of where we're at and where we're going, it really, this crisis has touched all aspects of real estate, you know, from the purely local, very site-specific, day-to-day operational levels to, quite frankly, big picture in the entire industry.
Right.
You know, Matt, so I actually have a question inside a couple different things. First, with regards to contracts and evaluating clauses and loopholes. You know, like I know Tushar's done something great with where he is and his landlord and tenant relationship, but you know, I think that, you know, what Tushar was saying and being innovative in this time frame and really seeing if there's an opportunity to do things differently. Mm-hmm. I'd love to get your take on what you've seen from kind of the landlords you've spoken with and dealt with, because for me personally, it's been a little bit of a struggle, you know, both positives and negatives. There's always both in all world. But specifically, I think of opportunities for us to work together to create, you know, with outdoor dining and creating a project P&L where we can share equity. And then with that share, we're also, you know, reducing our rent for a quarter or 6 months or 12 months, whatever the case is. Have you seen those types of relationships happen, you know, more?
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, so look, it really depends on the client and the individual landlord. I think you saw a little bit more resistance at the onset, as kind of the full reality of the situation really kind of manifested itself. But, you know, one of the things that I've been preaching throughout from the onset of this is cooperation. And the reality is the rules of the game that existed before March in a lot of ways are completely out the window right now. And it does a landlord absolutely no good to have an out of business restaurant or retail shop or a dark hotel, sitting on their land. Because the reality is that influx of new tenants or new restaurants that could be potentially moving on site, they're not there. So for the most part, it's in every landlord's best guidance and otherwise going forward to make sure that it's in their industry to make sure that their tenants stay afloat. And there was a lot of skepticism, I think, at various points in time, depending on the tenancy and otherwise, whether tenants were doing everything that they needed to do or could do, and how much of this was simply taking advantage of the situation versus how much of this was just pure dire straits. And, you had the Starbuckses of the world going and sending landlord notices that basically every single Starbucks in the country was going to cease paying rent for the next 6 months or more. And, whereas you had other tenants that are real struggling small businesses asking for similar relief, and landlords were having to figure out, is this a business that really needs help? Or is this simply kind of corporate America play, asking and taking advantage of the situation to go and give themselves a better deal? And the combination of dealing with outdoor dining issues and working with municipalities and working with your landlords to figure it out and to make sure that you have safe sites that are fully operational within the confines of local zoning laws and other issues along those lines. It's been a challenge. And as you said, it's really been kind of on the fly, where we've all had no choice but to kind of on a day-by-day basis, just figure out all of this and what you're legally permissible to do and what your risks and liabilities are. And the reality is, insurance, quite frankly, even wasn't really built to address a lot of these situations.
No, it wasn't.
And so from sometimes you do run into situations as a landlord where it's something that you want to do, but between municipal constraints and insurance constraints and otherwise, you might not be able to do. And so balancing all of those factors, and by the way, your lender might not let you do it either. You just have a lot of constraints, and it's evaluating all of these things and working together to juggle these different parts and circumstances and restraints and freedoms. It's a challenge. And so, my takeaway on all of this is just, it's incumbent on everybody, whether you're a landlord, a lender, a tenant, insurance company, anybody. It's incumbent on all of us to work together to try and find viable solutions.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that takes time sometimes. So it might not be, as a tenant, you might be, you're dying trying to figure out how to get all of this to work, but it might take a landlord a week or 2 or 3 to figure it out as they're waiting for municipalities to respond and the insurance companies to respond and their lenders to respond. And nobody has easy answers to any of these issues. So it's just been an interesting time to deal with all of these issues from a legal perspective.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Tushar, have you seen that kind of stuff? Like how has your experience been in interacting with landlords or, whatever it is that you have going on in your particular situation, kind of like what Matt was just talking about?
The whole gamut of everything. It's
the whole thing.
The whole thing. So, all right, starting with landlord. So we were helped out. We got some reduced rent kicked in for 3 months. Doesn't help me now, but it did give us a break initially. But it's still tough. I can't make rent, pay my staff, and operate at a bad week last week like 20%, 30%, and then this week is a little bit better at like 40% so far. There's too many variables, and like we said earlier, the constants are constant. Same phone bill, same rent, same utility usage. Yeah. None of that's getting given a break given to us at all. So it's a tough time, and like what Matt was saying, it's in the landlord's best interest to keep us where we're at. Otherwise, the next restaurant's going to come in and flop. They're going to come in and do all this work for what? Nothing.
Right.
Or think they're at the power play and try to negotiate it down. Hey, you have a vacant space. I'm going to give you 30% now.
Yeah. You know, so, and then like here, perfect example. Now we have to scramble every day because, you know, weather depending on how, you know, how we set up our tables outside. You know, I had to go out and spend all kinds of money on tents, right? So we put a 10 by 20 tent out, and then in the evening we'll get a little bit busier. Then we'll add another 10 by 20 tent. But then, you know, then it's like, all right, at the end of the night, it's got to come inside. Yeah. So it's set up, breakdown constantly. And then, you know, we post pictures of what we're doing, and then you got these people that want to sit there and comment, well, that doesn't look like it's socially distanced. Yeah. So, you know, like I get hit in every single area possible.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
You know, look, the interest in the counter to that, and we all completely appreciate the tenants' concerns. You know, from a landlord's perspective, you still have to pay your mortgage payments, and you still have to pay your taxes, and you still have to pay your insurance on the property. And so, you know, whereas, you know, and it's all a trickle down effect because, you know, though you haven't seen property tax relief for landlords. Lenders are still expecting landlords to pay their debt, you know, make their monthly mortgage payments. And quite frankly, the landlords the lenders were building in, you know, your standard rent, you know, to be able to go and, you know, pay their debt. And, you know, if you have a landlord in foreclosure, it doesn't do the tenant a lot of good either. And again, the reality is it's impacting everybody's bottom line as a result of this. And it is a partnership. Right. And, you know, landlords are, you know, I think that more landlords than not are sympathetic to, you know, tenants' plight and the reduction in business and everything going on along those lines. But when a landlord, you know, in a landlord's attempt to, you know, keep tenants afloat and give rental abatements and other things along those lines, that means that rent, that money that the landlord was dependent upon to pay their monthly rent and to pay their taxes and things like that, that's coming out of pocket now versus what was, you know, coming out of the margin from, you know, the rental stream. And it just poses problems all the way up to the top.
Yeah, it's the entire supply chain. Matt, right. One of the questions I have real quick is regarding kind of some of the regulations and rules we have in place currently in the state of New Jersey.
Sure.
So, I mean, if you ask 12 people what they can and cannot do via eating inside, how many walls you have open with windows, I mean, I see you smiling, right? I'm sure that there's some regulatory agreement or law that was placed in effect that spells it out a little bit differently. But as an entrepreneur, I'd love to know a little bit more. Perhaps you have some intel on that because, I mean, who's to say some of these restaurants don't fall within that construct and are not utilizing what they should be?
Right.
And then on the other side of that, Matt, just real quick before you go into your thing.
This is my co-host, Trevor Andersen, everybody.
Oh, no, just because it's something, obviously, it's pride and true to me, you know.
Yeah, right.
But
it's all good.
Where does the step in come from the local government, the state law? Tushar and I had a conversation about this. I was at his restaurant last week. Great food, by the way. Where's the enforcement? So if I saw someone eating inside, you know, is it just the hammer slaps? You know, what's the steps that they can and cannot take against you? And it's good to educate people, I think, especially business owners.
Yeah, and look, so it is a top-down approach where, you know, we have Governor Murphy, you know, who you know, any of our political leaders out there right now, this is not an enviable position for any of them to be in. They're all trying to figure this out on the fly as well. From the president all the way down to our local health officials. Like, you know, in exactly what you outlined is kind of like the challenge. You know, when Governor Murphy was giving, you know, his executive orders trying to figure this out on kind of a daily basis or a weekly basis and a monthly basis, you know, he ultimately did provide in his executive order that municipalities weren't supposed to be providing contradictory regulations or other things in effect. And ultimately, at the end of the day, his executive orders were intended to control. But in terms of enforcement, in terms of dealing with these day-to-day operational issues, it does, in my opinion, still really fall upon municipalities for enforcement. And you're dealing with building code issues, and you're building with the local health departments and otherwise to deal with most of these issues. And again, you know, as a real estate attorney, I don't get into kind of like what I would consider the day-to-day OSHA health and safety aspects of running a business. But I can completely understand and appreciate the question and the problem of people pointing fingers this way and pointing fingers that way. Because, number one, a lot of government offices have quite frankly closed down, or they're working on like extremely skeletal staffs at the moment. And number two, they don't have the answers, because I don't think a lot of these answers really fully exist or have been vetted out as to what would ordinarily be the course. So there is a lot of confusion, and it's rightful confusion because it just hasn't been fully delineated out. But what I would always recommend, and what I would recommend, is start on the municipal level and work your way up. At the end of the day, it's most likely going to be your local zoning officer and your local building department and otherwise. That's going to be the boots on the ground letting you know what you can and you can't do. And if it's not within their purview, they'll tell you, and then you kind of have to go up the chain afterwards.
Is it important to document that as well, Matt? Let's say I spoke to my local town and they said, it's not us. And then, down the road, a month or two, and I make a decision to change my business model a little bit. I mean, that's just kind of the good housekeeping item.
It is. Yeah. Look, in these circumstances, confirming by email is probably the best way to do this. It's real time.
Yeah.
A lot of these officials, quite frankly, are also working remotely. They're not showing up in the office every day and otherwise. So you're more likely to get their attention via email anyway. Quite frankly, when you put it into email, it's, in the public record, so to speak, in that sense, in that they're responding to you on a municipal, email account. So I definitely think to the maximum extent possible, like, get confirmations via email versus just the verbal he said, she said. That does happen, and if somebody does tell you something in a verbal phone call, ask for their email address and send them an email just saying, confirming our conversation, this is what I'm doing. And if they don't respond, they don't respond.
Right. All right. So I want to move, because we're getting a little doomy and gloomy in here. Maybe not doomy and gloomy, but it's just like, it's just a downer. Like, you guys are being downers. So we're going to move this into some positive stuff. All right. So I have a question written down, maybe not a question, just like a topic that I have for each of you that I'm going to have you talk about. So Trevor, surprisingly, I'm going to start with you because we just haven't heard you enough so far. Things like some positive outlooks. Like, what are some things that you are seeing that are coming out of this situation that we're in right now? Let's just talk about restaurants, I guess. What are restaurants doing that you think are cool initiatives, cool things that they're doing, ways that they're protecting their customers, keeping people healthy, all that kind of stuff?
I think, transparency first and foremost. I mean, like, just these sound business owners like Tushar and Harvest Bistro and other places that are being, upfront with the customers. They're doing scans of the menus, making it easier as a consumer, because I love to go out to eat. I want it to be easy. I want to feel safe. I want to bring my daughter and my wife around. I don't want to feel uncomfortable. And, it's really the owners are taking a big step forward towards that. When I went out to eat with Tushar last week, I haven't been out that much, and I felt great. It was nice. It was easy to get to. I hit the little guy on the scan menu. I could look at the menu. I don't have to touch anything. You know what I mean? Like, this touchless POS stuff is a great opportunity for business owners to not have to exchange a lot of credit cards. A lot of the touchless scenario is very important to a lot of people out there to feel safe.
Yeah.
So I think that's a real positive out there. I think they're doing great things. Like I said, I felt very confident being there. I didn't feel like I was too close. They put the tables in such a way. It's a logistics. It's a orchestra, if you will, to kind of get things in harmony. But they're doing a great job with it. And I mean, besides past COVID, that's going to exist. The things that we've learned today will help streamline operations. Perhaps touchless and POS and all this other stuff will be the way of the future anyway. So maybe we would just sped some of those initiatives up, which is good.
Yeah.
So I think to me that's a real positive.
Yeah. Matt, how about you? So, like, from your perspective on the real estate end in this industry, what are some opportunities you're seeing coming out of this?
So it depends on, again, I'll say this, trying to stay away from the gloom and doom.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you got to be doom and gloom, that's fine. But
no. The reality is that there are going to definitively be winners and losers out of all of this. And unfortunately, there are going to be some losers that are going to be going out of business, and there's going to be vacant space, and there's going to be a lot of business equipment and other things along those lines that are going to be available outside the realm of everything else. And for those winners out there in particular, I would say that the world is going to be out there for your taking. A lot of your competition is not going to be there. Quite frankly, I think rents are going to be exponentially cheaper than they were, in March and February and April, or March or February or January or December of, this past year. And so going into 2021, 2022, if you're looking in growth mode and you're looking to go and form new businesses and otherwise, and you have sound financials. Now, sound financials are going to be an interesting little bit of a feature going forward. But I think that for new business growth, whether it's your existing businesses or otherwise, and you do think that you can expand into the market coming in out of 2021 and out of the gates, this is going to be as good of an opportunity for you as possible. From a real estate acquisition and sale perspective, unlike 2008, where you had basically a freezing of liquidity to a very, very large degree, and we were all worried about the banks collapsing and otherwise, I can tell you, I have firsthand knowledge that most of my clients, and I know a heck of a lot of other real estate investors out there, that have been pooling money for years now, waiting for this exact moment. Yep. There is a ton of private equity and liquidity out there that has been waiting for distressed debt and other opportunities to acquire real estate when prices started to drop, etc. And I do think that there is going to be a significant, as everything kind of clears and the dust settles and we see how many tenancies survive and how many tenancies, don't survive. And we get a clearer picture of where rent rolls are going to be and et cetera, heading into 2021. I think that there's going to be a significant uptick in deal activity with people looking for bargains and people looking for things. And how and where these numbers shake out, it remains to be seen. I think that you're going to see a pause on that, probably through a good chunk of 2020, because between the presidential election, everybody not really sure exactly where the next wave of COVID is going to be or otherwise. I don't really see it this year, but I think next year there's going to be a whole slew of opportunities for, people taking advantage of the situations in which, it just didn't work for, the current incarnation of businesses, shopping centers, et cetera.
Right.
And so for those successful businesses out there that are doing well, this is a perfect time for you to be growing going forward in the next couple of months, I think.
There you go. Now, Tushar, you were talking about something before we got on the call here about how you're working with the community and other businesses in the community. So why don't you talk about stuff like that?
All right. So I got two different things. I want to also add on to what Matt was saying earlier.
Yeah, you can do that too.
I'll just piggyback off of that real quick. So one of my biggest things is I'm always looking for growth, right? So and some of the toughest times is where most growth comes, for me. And Trevor and I spoke about this, and we're looking to expand and have similar to just one satellite kitchen, and then have 15, 20, 25 outposts from there. Because I believe you're saying there's going to be a lot of real estate available, and get in cheap and secure some good leases and money behind it. Helping out other businesses in the area was what I was talking about earlier. So we have a guy that's down at the train station, George, and he's like the town Santa Claus and everything. And he opens up his coffee shop 5-6 hours a day, and that's what he does. He sells coffee to all the commuters going back and forth to the city. So what's he going to do now? He's going to sit home and do absolutely nothing. So I took it upon myself. I just sent him a text message, and I'm like, George, you know what you can do? You're going to come and open up in my place, because my hours changed. I don't sell a lot of coffee. And so I just told him, I said, open up in here, push your business out of here. I don't want a cent from you, you know. And it's just like, you know, we have to help each other during these difficult times, you know. And it's just, you know, we can't be selfish and just, you know, want to take it in all ourselves.
Yeah.
You know? And, you know, like, you know, one of the biggest things for me is, you know, charity begins at home. My home is wherever I am, you know, and if it's in my business community, it's in my neighborhood, you know, where I live, anywhere. You know, I count everybody as equals, right? And like, hey, I'm not going to sit there and try to, you know, sell my coffee on top of your coffee. Sell it. I don't care, you know. But like, I don't want people to be in a, you know, get into a place of complacency, right? You know, it's just a boring place. And for him, he's such a great guy, and to help him out and to help him, you know, just get up out of bed and come down there, you know, it's great to see. And then on top of it, I get some new customers. So it's a win-win on top of it. So, you know, some of the commuters that I don't see during the day because they're eating lunch in Manhattan are now coming to me for lunch, you know, because, you know, one hand washes the other. And I think that's huge when, you know, times get tough like this.
Right.
You know, we just can't be just selfish upon, you know, how we have to survive. We have to survive as a whole too.
Well said.
Yeah.
All right, so we are going to move the show into our closing segment, which we call Under the Spotlight. So we're going to ask each of our panelists to give us a takeaway. It could be a bold prediction. It could be just, you know, a nice closing point that you want the listeners to walk away from this episode with. So we're going to put each of you under the spotlight. You give us your final point, and then we'll wrap it up. All right, so Trevor, we're going to start with you. You're under the spotlight. What do you got?
I originally was going to say something very bold that I wrote down, Mike, but
it was bold for sure.
Yeah, honestly, after hearing what Tushar said in regards to the community and helping businesses and one another, I think it's so important that people do that and really promote businesses inside of other businesses. Margins are important to thrive and survive, but if you don't have your customers, your next door neighbors to kind of help promote what you're doing, you're nowhere.
Right.
I think as we look to kind of go into the future, and, you know, I'm a CFO by trade, and I'm telling you right now, I think it's very important that obviously you look at your cost structure and everything aside of that and boost your sales and look at prices and all the great stuff that we do. But, you know, when it comes down to it, you know, we're people. And if we can help one another to kind of move forward, I think that's the most important thing that I can think of as very important to me in my own walk of life.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt, you're under the spotlight. What do you got?
All right. I think that there's a theme here. And the theme is that we are in unprecedented times. And we all, from a legal level, from a business level, from a municipal level, on all levels here, we all have to work together. And there are going to be a lot of us that do and some of us that don't. And from a legal level, I would say that, you know, my first job is always to help clients understand where the liabilities are. What's your worst case situation? And then it's my job to help you protect you from that. But after you get past all of that, the reality is on all levels of the food chain that we've been talking about here, every level is in an unprecedented situation with no real great solution that had been dealt with historically before. And all parties on a legal level and on a business level have to work together to try and make the most out of this situation. And I do hope that, you know, we live in some pretty divisive times right now. And out of crisis comes opportunity. And what you're hearing on this podcast and what I hope the message is and going forward with our business leaders in New Jersey and elsewhere is that, you know, we as a common society and as Americans have to figure this out together to get out of this mess. And I really hope out of all of this crisis on a legal level and on a business level, we're able to go and do that together and go into 2021 and we come out better. And, you know, from a legal level, our drafting has changed. I have different provisions in my contracts already than what I've been using for the past 10 years to address a lot of situations that, quite frankly, were just completely unforeseen and weren't addressed and weren't adequately addressed before March. And, now we know how to address them. And quite frankly, in almost every one of these negotiations that I'm having on a leasing level or otherwise, it involves more flexibility on both sides than what otherwise would have been. And the market's changed, and where the market is and where it's going, we don't exactly know. But I think together, in having that empathy and that ability for all parties to kind of understand the circumstances of a tenant, the circumstances of a landlord, the circumstances of government. Our governments are going to have to pay for schools, and they're not getting tax dollars from a lot of people that can't pay their taxes right now. All levels are impacted by this, and we have to be cognizant of that fact and try and figure this all out together.
Absolutely. Tushar, take us home, man.
All right. So, one of the keys is for myself and what I could, tell, whoever is out there in the audience, listen to this. I mean, don't operate in fear. Fear is paralyzing. So it's, if you're unsure about things, ask your neighbors, ask other business owners in the area to give you a hand and, help push, each other. Like we said before, it definitely unprecedented times. But I think, that's where we can flourish as a community and become stronger individually and as a whole.
Yeah.
These are just some basic principles, and morals that, today I've been through so much junk in my life, and it's just helped push me even further from, where I was even just 6 months ago, weathering another storm. It's like, I don't know. I've been through a housing crash. I've been through, stock market, 9/11. So this is like the 5th different type of pandemic.
Yeah.
Quote unquote, I've been through almost, tomorrow's our 24th year in business, So I don't try to get myself caught up, against the wall. I try to, just push through a lot of things, Yeah.
So. Absolutely. Yeah. All right. So that wraps up our show. Want to thank our panelists, Trevor Andersen, Matt Schiller, Tushar Patel, for coming on with us today. Obviously could not have done this without you, especially Trevor with his great co-hosting skills. So I will put, for everybody listening, I'm going to put everybody's contact information in the show notes. So if you want to reach out to Trevor, Matt, or Tushar, their contact information will be there. Websites, email addresses, whatever it is, whatever they want me to put in there. I'll put that in there so you can reach out to them. Please do. If you want to hear us talk about a specific topic on the Morning Spotlight, or if you want to be a guest on the Morning Spotlight, make sure you reach out to us at themorningspotlight@gmail.com or go to our website, themorningspotlight.com. We'll be happy to hear from you, do some different things. Guys, thank you again. I really appreciate it.
Thanks
for having me.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely. And everybody else, thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.